Some decisions are made with the mind, others are made with the heart. My choice to buy the Fiesta was completely the latter. It's a car that at the time I knew nothing about, and it's also a car which, by all accounts, should not have survived. Maybe it's just because it's green. Well, for starters, it's really not all that bad under here. There's a little bit of rust on pretty much every surface, but that's to be expected if something is still on the road after all this time and really hasn't been, well, maintained. Somebody put their own hole here in the firewall for unknown reasons to run what appears to be the windshield wiper fluid line, which goes absolutely nowhere. I'm guessing the reservoir would have been over here. Maybe those holes have something to do with it. Next to those holes, there is a bolt missing from one of the motor mounts, or if you're in English, engine mounts, which are shot, which is, you know, something we don't have to really think about unless we want to. And so let's look somewhere else. Weber 3236 has been rebuilt, K&N air filter. Mystery fluid leak way back in the corner back there, kind of hard to see on camera. But the big thing is, well, this car has been on fire. Yeah, I said it, fire. You can tell, first of all, by looking at the hood, that is a classic sign of fire damage, all that soot on the hood, which if you rub enough, I bet it'll come right off. Then you start looking at how many things are melted. The first thing I noticed were these little cherry bubbles on the shock tower. Then you look at the wires for the distributor cap. That's the big tell. They're melted just like the ones on the Corvette were. And a couple other things in here are melted. The throttle cable housing is a little melty. This has a little bit of melting on it. Again, this hose for the windshield wipers. I think it's been on fire. I think it's pretty safe to say it was at one time, but that's not necessarily a big deal as long as it was fixed and the problem was remedied. Otherwise, it's not bad. New battery, which is about, honestly, the same size as the engine. A couple new hoses. There are definitely new spark plug wires. I don't think it's too bad. I wonder what a couple things are that seem to not go anywhere. But beyond that, honestly, there's so little going on in here that there's really not a lot to be wrong. So I'm thankful for that, and I'm really hoping that this compression test tells us what we want to know and not what we need to know. Well, at least this engine includes a nice area for tools. Plug leads are numbered. Let's go ahead and get them off of here. There they are. And there they are. Oh, we should disconnect the battery. Do that first. Don't do it right now. Do it first. Alright, the battery's been disconnected. The spark plugs, which are at a very strange angle, are now exposed. Well, they're not in there with a big arm. That's nice. I'd be concerned if they were. Go ahead and bend my knee extremely backwards to do that. Well, they're not exactly new, are they? They're soaked in oil, that's for sure. No, it's a lot of oil. When they said new plugs, I think they meant new years ago when they put them on, based on the amount of rust on them and the amount of crap on the threads. Alright, let's do a compression test. Well, I was going to remove the ignition coil, and it turns out it's just in here loose. Like, as in loose. Like, there it is. Okay. Maybe we'll just remove it all together. You can actually hear the fluid in here. This is WD-40 all over the outside, but you can actually hear the fluid in there. Not good. Not much fuel, good. Leave that right there. Doesn't start. About 140. Not bad. Right, so I have the results here. Cylinder 1 did 130 psi, cylinder 2 130, cylinder 3 135-ish, cylinder 4 140-ish. So what do these numbers mean? Well, the rule of thumb is if you're within 10 to 15% on every cylinder, you're doing just fine. Compression test numbers themselves can vary for a number of reasons. For example, it's hotter than Satan's in here, and that could affect the numbers. It's also very humid. The engine was cold, it wasn't warm because I didn't run it before I did the compression test. All of those things could result in numbers that are a little off, or maybe even 5 to 10 psi lower than they would be if conditions were correct. It got to the number very quickly and it held that number very consistently, so I didn't see the need to go through and do it a bunch more times. It seems to be that the compression on this engine is good. Good Lord. My leak down tester, the threads are not long enough to reach down into this block. So my neighbor Justin, who has a warehouse here in the same complex, was able to hook me up with a piece to borrow. So that's awesome. Thank you, Justin. Without further ado, we're going to leak down test this car. We're going to LDT this SOB. Alright, so what I'm going to do now is hook my air in on this end of the tester. I'm going to hook my tester onto this end of the tester. I mean my cylinder onto this end of the tester, if I can do that with one hand. There we go. So that's that. That will tell us what's going on. The first 3 cylinders we tested went great. They held pressure really well, there were no bubbles in the radiator fluid, there was no air in the exhaust pipe, no air in the crankcase, nothing. That is until we got to the last cylinder, the one closest to the driver's side, which I assume is cylinder number 1, and no matter what we did,
it just wouldn't hold. We thought maybe we weren't at top dead center, so we reset it 3 different times using the screwdriver in the spark plug hole trick, and still we got nothing. Here, take a listen.
Not what it is. Maybe these push rods being so loose on the cylinder is part of the problem.
We even repeated the compression test on this cylinder, and yet again it came out at 140 or so. I have no idea what's going on here. Maybe a ring is stuck or something. I've never heard of a compression test being great and a leak down test being 0 at the same time. Not to mention it starts instantly, like on the very first crank, and I've never heard of a car with 3 cylinders doing that, except for ones that have 3 cylinders originally. If you have any ideas on that, maybe leave a comment and tell me what I might be missing here.
Alright, so we took a good look at the car. We gave it a top to bottom, a left to right, a front to back. We've got a list here of the things that we found. Starting with spark plugs. Those need replaced. They're cheap. Might as well do them. The distributor cap is definitely worn. Might as well replace that, along with the rotor, which is also, well, it's not original, but it's worn. Front right blinker is not attached by anything. I think the first time I go 50 miles an hour, that blinker is going to come off. The electronic ignition has burned wires. The driver's side engine mount is shot. The passenger side engine mount is shot. The cradle mounts, it's safe to assume those are shot. One radiator hose on the front was completely loose. Both of the hose clamps were just bouncing around. The brake reservoir cap is leaking. The vapor hose going from the oil cap to the crankcase is leaking and loose. There are corroded wires going to the alternator. All the suspension bushings are some degree of worn. Some of them are toast, some of them are just about to be toast, and some of them are somehow okay. I don't know. They probably all need replaced anyway at this point, if you want to do the whole car correctly. The ignition coil sounds like it has water in it. That's something that happens with these oil-filled coils. Oil-filled coils, oil-filled coils, oil-filled coils. The oil inside the ignition coil breaks down, especially if the car gets really hot. Maybe it had a fire in the past, as we've deduced from the rest of this. So that oil is broken down. Basically a sign that the coil needs to be replaced. The other sign that needs to be replaced is that it's the wrong coil. This car has electronic ignition, and from my research on the forum, you're not supposed to use a stock coil with electronic ignition. Inside the valve cover there was definitely some age, but the thing that concerned me the most was that there was just loose stuff everywhere. There was loose sediment on the valve springs, especially if you got to high speeds on the highway, and especially if you ran a can of seafoam through it, all of that would be gone. So it further confirms that this car wasn't really driven, but also you just put a can of seafoam in there and that stuff will go away. Might as well just change the oil in the filter while we're at it, because I don't know how old it is. It's still pretty good looking oil, but if it's been sitting for a couple years. The battery is from 2017, the tires are from 2017 or 18, so we'll change transmission fluid, radiator fluid, brake fluid while we're at it. It's a cable operated clutch, so we don't have to worry about that. The oil cap had some melting on it, also indicative of the fire that struck this car at some point. And then we come to the big one. There was a mystery leak on the firewall. It's melted, it's sticky, like over time, especially in an engine bay, as that stuff heat cycles, I think it just started to melt. Does it mean the electronic ignition is shot? I don't know. I don't think so, although I don't think it's good to run it the way it is. So I'm gonna ask the forum, and I'm probably just gonna plan on buying like an MSD box or something like that, something like robust that can replace this admittedly pretty old ignition module. I didn't think it was going to be quite that bad. I figured it was going to be a lot. Number one, it's really hard to get parts for this car, especially in the US. Number two, the previous owners, their intention was never to get the thing driving. They just kind of wanted to wrench on it and get it running. My priority really is to get this thing driving. I wanted to make sure it goes down the road safely. I drove it when I picked it up. It drove itself onto the trailer, so I know the engine, based on the compression test and driving it, is somewhat healthy. Honestly, I'm probably not going to do all the bushings until I know this thing runs and drives. This is one of those cars, like the Corvette, that you can't get rubber bushings for a lot of the suspension parts. You have to get polyurethane. Polyurethane is expensive. Also, polyurethane makes the car ride like a wood-wheeled cart. So it's not something I'm in a hurry to do on this car. I kind of like being comfortable on the road and not having my implants fall out. Did I say implants? I meant fillings. Actually, I do have dental implants as well, so I wasn't talking about that. We were taking it off the trailer, and by we, I mean me, shirtless by myself in the parking lot on a 95-degree day. And even though I was being super careful about taking it off the trailer, I guess I tore something. A tie rod end, a ball joint, a control arm bushing, something. The left side, the driver's side front wheel is like cocked way in. It's got so much camber, it's not even funny. Also, the rear has a bunch of camber, but the rear camber is positive camber, and it's a solid axle on the rear, so I don't really think you can adjust the camber on the rear. Is it bent? Is there something wrong there? I don't know. I guess we'll find out. Well, friends, there you have it. Mark I Ford Fiesta has joined the group of derelict toys in this warehouse, none of which currently run except this one, so this, technically at this point, has everything else beaten. See you next time. Maybe it's just because